"Let the peasants shoot," the young lord called across the gun line, and the lords laughed, and not one of them knew they were laughing at the keeper of a royal life. I was the officer of the sentries that autumn, and I stood 3 paces behind my man with my hands folded and my face still, the way you learn to keep a face still when you have worn the gray coat of the House of Vance for 30 winters. They had been at the wine since the long table at noon. Now the afternoon shooting was on us, and the gentlemen of the county had spilled out of the lodge in their fine green coats with their fine engraved guns, and they had found, posted at the edge of the heather like a fence post, the lone sentry who stood the moors at Greywater Lodge. His name was Corporal Hallward Crane. He was not a tall man. He was not a young one. He stood with the old fowling musket of the lodge guard slung at his shoulder, his eyes on the line of the hills, and he did not so much as turn his head when they began on him. It started with the heir to the Fenwick estate, a soft-handed boy of perhaps 22 named Roderick, who had inherited his father's lands and his father's certainty, and none of his father's sense. He had missed 3 birds in a row off the first drive, and a man who misses likes to find a smaller man to stand above. "You," Roderick said, pointing his glove at Crane. "Sentry, you hold a gun all day, do you not? Standing there like a scarecrow. Tell me, have you ever once hit what you aimed at?" Crane said nothing. "That is the post. The sentry of Greywater does not answer the guests. He answers only the duty officer and the master of the house. I had taught him that myself, years before, and he had never once needed reminding." His silence was taken, as silence always is by men who have never had to hold their tongue, for slowness, for dullness, for the empty patience of a beast in a field. "He doesn't even understand the question," laughed a second man, a stout cousin of the Marlowes with a face already pink from the bottle. "Look at him. Bought him with the lodge, I should think. Comes with the furniture." "Peasant marksmanship," Roderick said, and rolled the words on his tongue like he had just invented them, and the others took it up, peasant marksmanship, until it was the joke of the afternoon. A man who could only hold a gun. A man who had surely never fired one in earnest in all his dull life. A fence post in a coat. I will tell you what I was thinking, standing 3 paces back with my hands folded. I was thinking of a morning 11 years gone, and a single shot across a frozen river, and a king who would not be alive to keep these grounds, had that fence post not pulled a trigger when no other man in the kingdom could have made the shot. But that was not mine to say, and it was not the time, and so I held my own tongue the way I had taught Crane to hold his, and I waited to see what the gentlemen would do with their afternoon. They did what idle men with wine and guns always do. They made a wager of him. "A contest," Roderick declared, sweeping his arm wide as though the heather were his ballroom. "I propose a contest. Our scarecrow against me, why not? 3 shots each at the long mark. If the postman wins, I shall give him a guinea and apologize to his furniture. And if I win," he grinned around at his fellows, "he stands here and admits before us all that he has never in his life hit a thing worth hitting." The laughter came again, warm and cruel and easy. And here was the trouble, and I felt the cold of it go down my spine before any of them. The master of Greywater that season was old Lord Asher, and Lord Asher was bedridden in the upper rooms with the wasting cough, and in his absence the lodge had been given over to his nephew to host the county shoot. The nephew, a languid man named Pell, lounged on the lodge steps with a glass in his hand and saw nothing in the sport but more sport. There was no one to forbid it. The chain of command at Greywater that afternoon ran from a dying old man too sick to lift his head, through a bored nephew who would allow anything for a laugh, down to me, a sentry's officer with no standing to refuse a guest of the house. I stepped forward. I am not a large man either, and I have never raised my voice in my life, but I have a way of placing myself between a thing and the people who would do it harm, and the laughter thinned a little when I did. "My lords," I said, "the sentry stands his post. He does not enter wagers, it is not permitted him. And who are you? Said Roderick, turning the full weight of his boredom upon me. The officer of the watch, my lord. Crane here is under my command. Then you may release him from it for the space of an afternoon. Roderick's smile did not move. Unless you fear he'll make a fool of your gray coats. Is that it, officer? Are you protecting him? Do you also believe your scarecrow cannot shoot? I will not pretend the question did not strike a nerve, though not the nerve he meant. There are kinds of protection a man cannot offer without telling a thing he is sworn never to tell. I could have ended it in one sentence. I could have said the 11 words that would have wiped the wine-grins from every face on that gun line and sent them home silent to lie awake. I did not have leave to say them. Some truths belong to the crown, and a man who guards the crown guards its silences too. So I did the only thing left to me. I looked past the lords to Crane. He had not moved. The wind off the moor was lifting the heather in long gray waves and stirring the fur of his cap, and his eyes were where they had been the whole hour out, on the hills, watching the way he had watched a frozen river once with the fate of a kingdom resting on the steadiness of his hands. But I have stood beside this man through 11 years of weather and watches, and I know the small things about him that no lord at a wine table will ever read. I saw the muscle move at the corner of his jaw. I saw his right hand, the still hand, settle a half-inch on the strap of the musket. He had heard every word. He had heard peasant marksmanship a dozen times over. He had heard them call him furniture. And the post said hold, and the post said silence, and the post is the post. But I am his officer, and the choice of whether to release him from it for the space of an afternoon was, in the end, mine and not Lord Roderick's. Corporal Crane, I said, and my voice carried out over the heather. Stand easy. You have my leave to shoot. The line went very quiet. Then Roderick laughed, delighted, and clapped his gloved hands together once, and called for the long marks to be set, and not one of those gentlemen had the smallest idea what they had just asked for. They thought they had bought themselves an afternoon's cruelty with a fence post. They had handed a loaded musket to the keeper of a royal life. The keeper set the long marks at the far edge of the rough ground, where the heather gave way to the first rise of the hills. 3 white wooden boards, each the size of a dinner plate, each with a black ring painted at its heart, planted at a distance that made the stout Marlowe cousin whistle through his teeth, and several of the younger men exchange the small glances of men who have begun to suspect they have overreached. It was a long shot. Long even for the fine engraved guns of the county. Longer still for the heavy old fowling musket of the lodge watch, which was a serviceable weapon and an honest one but no gentleman's toy. The wind was crossing left to right and gusting in the hollows, and the light was going flat and gray, the way mountain light goes in the late afternoon when the cloud comes down off the tops. A man who knew his trade would read all of that in a glance and feel his stomach tight. A man who did not would see only a white board and a black ring and think it easy. Roderick saw only the board. First blood to the challenger, I think, he said, and stepped to the line with his beautiful gun, and made a great show of settling himself, one boot forward, chin tucked, the gun coming up slow so that everyone might admire the figure he cut. He was not, I will allow, a wholly bad shot. He had been taught by good men since he could walk, and he had shot more game in his short life than most men shoot in 50 years. But he had been taught on tame estates with the marks set kind and the wind always at his back, and he had never once had to make a shot that mattered. And there is a world of difference between a man who shoots for sport and a man who has shot for something. His first ball struck the board. Low and left, well outside the black ring, but it struck the board, and his fellows roared as though he had split the heavens. His second clipped the very edge of the plank and sent up a curl of splinters and missed the ring by the width of a hand. The cheering was a touch quieter. His third he hurried, eager to finish strong, and it went wide into the heather and raised a puff of dust off a stone, and there was a silence after it that he covered with a loud laugh. "The wind," he announced, Damnable wind. Well, 2 of 3 on the board. Let us see the scarecrow better it. I watched Crane the whole time the lords were carrying on, and I will tell you what a man learns to see when he has stood beside another man for 11 years. He was not watching Roderick's form. He was watching Roderick's misses. He was reading the wind off where the dust had jumped, reading the drop off where the second ball had struck low, reading the whole field the way you read a thing you have been reading all your life without being told to. His eyes had narrowed just slightly. His breathing had slowed. The board fence post that the lords had been laughing at all afternoon had quietly, without a word, become something else, and not a soul among the gentlemen had the eyes to see it happen. He stepped to the line. He did not make a figure of himself. He did not tuck his chin for the gallery or set his boot to please the crowd. He simply settled, the way water settles into the shape of the thing that holds it, the musket coming up into his shoulder as though it had grown there. There was no flourish in it at all. That is the first thing the true ones lack, flourish. A man who needs to look like he can shoot is telling you he is not sure he can. Crane looked like nothing. He looked like the act of aiming itself, made into a man. 2 guineas says he doesn't reach the board, the Marlowe cousin called, and got no takers, because even the drunk among them had begun, dimly, to feel the air change. Crane did not hurry. He let the gusting wind go by him, waiting, the way you wait out a sentry's long, cold hour, the way you wait for a thing you know is coming. The heather lay down in a long wave and stood back up. And in the trough of the wind, in the half-second of stillness between 2 gusts, when the air over the rough ground went flat and true, he fired. I did not see the ball. No man sees the ball. But I saw the white board jump on its stake, and I saw, even at that distance, the small dark hole that had opened in the very center of the black ring, dead heart, as clean as if a man had walked up and pressed his thumb to it. Nobody cheered. The silence that came down over the gun line was a different silence than the one that had ridden Roderick's misses. It was the silence of men beginning to understand that they have made a mistake whose size they cannot yet measure. Lucky, somebody said very quietly, and did not sound as though he believed it. Crane reloaded. He did it without looking at his hands, which is a thing only men who have loaded under far worse conditions than a county wager can do, men who have loaded in the dark and the cold, with hands gone numb and the stakes higher than a guinea and a laugh. The wind came and went. He waited for the trough. He fired. The second board jumped, dead heart. Beside the first hole, you might have laid the 2 of them under a single coin. Now there was no talk at all. Roderick's smile had gone somewhere it could not be found. The stout cousin had lowered his bottle. The languid nephew Pell had come down off the lodge steps without anyone noticing him do it, and was standing at the edge of the line with his glass forgotten in his hand, and a look on his face like a man watching something he had been told all his life, was a fairy story walk in through the front door. 1 board left. The wind had freshened. The light had dropped another notch toward dusk, and the far white plank was going gray in the failing day, a hard mark now even to find, let alone to strike. A man shooting for a guinea would have been forgiven for missing it. A man shooting to make a point would have rushed it and missed it for certain. Crane was not shooting for either. I knew, watching him, that he had stopped thinking of the lords entirely. They had ceased to exist for him the moment the musket came up. He was somewhere else now, somewhere I had only been told of and never seen, a place 11 years and a frozen river away, and the white board in the dying light was not a wager anymore. It was the thing his whole life had bent itself toward being able to hit. He breathed out, long and slow, the way I have heard him breathe on a watch when the cold is at its worst, the breath that empties a man of everything but the single thing in front of him. The wind dropped into its trough. He fired. The third board jumped on its stake, and the dark heart opened in it, dead center, 3 for 3, a thing not 1 man in 1,000 could have done with a gentleman's gun in fair light. and which he had done with the lodge's honest old musket in a failing gray dusk against a crossing wind, while 24 lords who had called him furniture watched in a silence you could have heard a heather bell fall through. And still, and this is the thing I want you to understand about the man, he did not turn to look at them. He did not seek a single face for its astonishment. He brought the musket down, set it back upon his shoulder, faced front toward the hills, and became once more the fence post they had mocked, as though nothing at all had passed. It was Roderick who broke the silence, and his voice was not the voice it had been an hour before. "Where," he said, "did a lodge sentry learn to shoot like that?" It was the question, of course. It was the only question, and it was the one question I could not answer, because the true answer to it was the 11 words I was sworn never to speak, and the half answer would only make them dig, and idle men who begin to dig do not stop until they have turned up something that ruins a quiet man's quiet. "In the service of the house, my lord," I said, which was true and told them nothing, "as all the watch are trained." "Don't insult me," Roderick said, but there was no heat in it now. He was staring at Crane the way a man stares at a card trick he cannot account for, half angry, half hungry to know. "The watch are not trained to that. No one is trained to that. I have shot beside the best guns in 3 counties, and I have never seen a man put 3 balls in 3 hearts at that range in this light, and you stand there and tell me your scarecrow did it in the way of his ordinary duties. I tell you he stands his post, my lord, and that he was given leave to shoot and that he shot. The rest is not mine to discuss." That phrase, "not mine to discuss," is a poor shield, and I knew it even as I raised it. It is the kind of phrase that, instead of closing a door, paints a great red arrow upon it. I saw Roderick's eyes sharpen. I saw the languid nephew Pell, who had heard it too, set down his glass at last on the stones of the step. And then an old man spoke, from the back of the gun line, where he had been standing all the while in a heavy coat with a fur collar, leaning on a stick, a man I had marked when the guests arrived, because there is a way that certain old men carry themselves, a way you only learn in one trade, and I had thought when I saw him, that one was a soldier once, and not the parade kind. "Crane," the old man said. He did not say it loudly. He said it the way you say a name you have not said in years and are testing on your tongue to see if it is the right one, and I saw the corporal's shoulders change. It was the smallest thing, a settling, a bracing, but I have stood beside him 11 years, and I know his body the way I know my own, and I knew in that instant that the old man had reached past the fence post and touched the man inside the coat. "Howard Crane," the old man said again, and came forward through the parting lords, slow on his stick, his eyes fixed on the corporal's still profile. "By the Lord above, it is you. I should know that stillness anywhere. I watched a younger version of it for 2 days once, on a hillside in the cold, and I have not forgotten a minute of it as long as I have lived." The lords were looking from the old man to the sentry and back again. Roderick had gone quite pale. "You know this man, Colonel?" Pell asked, and at the word colonel I saw several of the younger gentlemen straighten unconsciously, the way men do at a rank, even men who have never served a day. The old man, the colonel, stopped an arm's length from Crane and looked up at him, for Crane was the taller after all, and his old eyes were bright and wet at the rims. "Know him," the colonel said softly. "I owe him a thing no man can pay, we all do, though there is not one of you grinning jackanapes who has the first idea of it." He turned then, and his bright eyes went down the gun line, and I will tell you that under that look the wine courage drained out of those gentlemen like water out of a cracked jug. "You called him peasant. I heard you. I stood at the back and I heard every word, and I held my tongue because I thought, let the man have his quiet, he has earned a lifetime of it. But I will not stand here and let you go home thinking you bested a fool today. You did not best him. You could not best him on the best day of your soft little lives, and you do not deserve to know why." "Colonel," I said, low, a warning, because I did not know how much he knew or how much he meant to say, and there are men's lives that hang on what is and is not spoken aloud at a county shoot. He heard me. He was an old soldier. He heard the warning under the word. He looked at me, and something passed between us, two men who had each guarded a silence in our time, and he gave a small nod that said he understood the ground better than I had feared. "I'll say only this," the colonel said, turning back to the white-faced lords, "and then I'll say no more, because the rest is not mine to give, as your officer has rightly told you. There was a winter, years back, a bad winter in a bad place, where matters of the kingdom hung by a thread thinner than any of you will ever come near in your whole lives. And on a certain morning, at a certain river, the whole of that thread, everything, do you understand me, everything, came down to a single shot that no man living could be expected to make. The cold was past bearing. The light was failing as it fails now. The wind was crossing as it crosses now. And the one shot in all the world that had to be made, was a shot that one man and one man only could put where it had to go." He stopped. The heather hissed in the wind, not a lord breathed. "I was there," the colonel said. "I saw the man take the shot. I saw what the shot saved. And I will go to my grave grateful to the God that put that man on that hillside on that morning, because if he had missed, if his hand had so much as trembled, none of us would be standing on these moors today, and the house you are all so pleased to be guests of would be ash and a sad story, and a great many graves would have been dug that were never dug." His voice dropped. "And then this afternoon I came up the hill to a gentleman's shoot, expecting nothing, an old man come for the air, and I found that man standing at a fence post in a sentry's coat, being called furniture by a boy who has never in his life been asked to do one hard thing, and I watched that boy hand him a musket for sport." Roderick made a sound. It was not a word. It was the sound a man makes when the floor he was standing on turns out to have been over a great drop the whole time. "You see now," the colonel said gently, almost kindly, "why your officer would not let me dig. Some men carry a thing too heavy to be set down at a wine table for the amusement of strangers. He carries it. He has carried it for 11 years without once asking a soul to thank him, standing at a post in the rain on a lonely moor, while you and your friends shot your tame birds and drank your wine and grew up believing the world owed you its applause." He looked at Crane, and his voice gentled further still. "I'll not say the where of it, son. I'll not say the what. Your officer's right, it isn't ours. But I'll be hanged if I'll let them call you peasant in my hearing, and never know they were standing in the presence of the man who—" "Colonel, it was Crane." It was the first word the corporal had spoken in the whole of that long afternoon, and at the sound of it every head turned, because the fence post had a voice after all, low and level, and roughened by 1,000 cold watches, and there was in it neither pride nor anger, but only the quiet weight of a man laying down a load with great care. "Leave it there, sir," Crane said. "If you please, they needn't know." The colonel looked at him a long moment, and then he bowed his head, the way one soldier yields to another's right to his own silence, and he stepped back, and he said no more. But the thing had been opened now, even unspoken, and there are silences that say more than any account. The lords stood in the failing light with the wind off the moor pulling at their fine coats, and they looked at the small still man at the fence post, and they understood without the where, without the what, without a single one of the 11 words I was sworn to keep, that they had spent the whole of that golden afternoon mocking a man to whom every one of them, and the very house over their heads, and the kingdom under their feet, owed a debt past the reach of any wager. It was Roderick who came forward. I will give him that much. Whatever else the boy was, he came forward when a smaller man would have slunk to his horse. He stopped before Crane, and the gloved arrogance was gone out of him entirely, and he looked, for the first time that day, like what he was, a young man who had been handed everything and had earned none of it, standing before a man who had been handed nothing and earned all of it. "Corporal Crane," he said, and his voice was not steady, I called you furniture, I called you a peasant, I made a wager of you for the amusement of my friends." He swallowed. "I have never in my life been more ashamed of anything I have done. I do not ask you to forgive it. I should like to understand what manner of man I insulted, if you will permit me. The colonel says he cannot tell me, but I should like to hear it from you, whatever you choose to give, so that I never forget it." Crane looked at him for a long moment. The wind moved the heather, and then the corporal did a thing I had never once seen him do in 11 years of watches. He turned fully from the hills he was sworn to watch, and faced the men who had mocked him, and he gave them, not the where, not the what, never the names, for those were the crowns and not his, but a thing far rarer than a secret. He gave them the truth of himself, plainly, the way an honest man hands over an honest coin. "I was a soldier once," he said. "Before the lodge, I was good at one thing. I had a gift for it that I never asked for and cannot explain, the way some men can sing and some men can reckon sums in their heads. I could put a ball where it had to go. That is all. It is not a thing to be proud of. A man does not choose his gifts, he only chooses what he does with them." He paused. "There came a winter when the kingdom needed that one thing I was good at. There was a morning when a great deal, more than I will say, came down to whether I could hold my hand still in a cold past anything you have known and make a shot that had to be made. I made it. That is the whole of it that you may have. I made the shot, and a man lived who would otherwise have died. And because that man lived, a very great many other things did not fall that would have fallen." He stopped. The colonel behind him had his hand over his mouth. "And then," Roderick whispered. "And then I asked to be sent somewhere quiet," Crane said. "I had done the thing I was put on the earth to do. I did not want a medal for it. I did not want it spoken of. A man who has been useful in that way one time learns that the only thing he wants afterward is to never be needed in that way again, to stand somewhere cold and lonely and ordinary, where nothing happens, and watch the hills and be left alone with what he carries. So I came here, to a fence post on a moor, where I have stood 11 years, and where I have been, until this afternoon, very content to be called nothing at all by men who did not know me, because being called nothing meant the work was over and the world was at peace, and no one would ever again need me to do the one terrible thing I am good at." He looked at Roderick, level, and without unkindness. "You did not insult a peasant, my lord. You insulted a man who chose to be taken for one. There is a difference. I hope you'll remember it the next time you find a quiet man standing at the edge of your sport. I have stood through a great many silences in 30 years of the gray coat. I have never stood through one like the one that followed." Then the colonel stepped forward, and he came to attention, an old man, on a stick, in a fur collar on a darkening moor, and he raised his hand and he saluted Corporal Crane, full and slow and proper, the salute one soldier gives another when words have run out. And Crane, after a moment, returned it. And then a strange thing happened along the gun line. Roderick, white-faced, brought himself up straight and put up his hand in a clumsy, untaught salute of his own, and the stout Marlowe cousin set down his bottle in the heather and did the same. And one by one, down the whole length of the line, the gentlemen of the county who had laughed at peasant marksmanship an hour before took off their hats or raised their hands as best they knew how, until every man on that hillside was on his feet in some homemade attitude of respect, saluting a fence post they had mocked, in the gray last light, with the wind coming down off the tops. Crane bore it for as long as he could. Then he turned back to the hills, because the post is the post, and a man does not stand all day to be looked at. He stands to watch. "You may go in, my lords," I said quietly. "The light's gone, the shooting's done." They went. They went without their laughter and without their swagger down the hill toward the warm windows of the lodge, and several of them looked back, and not one of them spoke. Roderick was the last to go. He stopped beside me on his way down, the heir to all of Fenwick, a humbled boy in the dark. "Officer," he said, will he be all right, standing out here all night, after all that?" It was the first thing the boy had said all day that was about another man and not about himself, and I marked it, because that is how you tell that a lesson has gone in and not merely glanced off, when a man begins to ask after someone other than himself. "He'll be all right, my lord," I said. "He's been all right out here 11 years. The standing is the easy part. It's the carrying that's hard, and he does that whether you watch him or not." Roderick nodded slowly. He looked out at the small figure at the fence post, black now against the last gray of the sky, and then he did a thing that surprised me. He took off his fine green shooting coat, the good wool, the silver buttons, and he held it out toward me. "It gets cold out here at night," he said. Would you give it to him, from me, with my regret?" I did not take the coat. I have learned in 30 years that there are gestures a man must make himself or they are worth nothing, and that an officer who carries another man's apology between them only robs both men of the thing the apology was for. "He's 3 paces away, my lord," I said. "If you have a thing to give him, give it to him." So Roderick walked the 3 paces, the longest 3 paces, I think, that the young heir to Fenwick had ever walked in his easy life, and he stood at the fence post beside the man he had called furniture, and he did not say anything, for there was nothing left worth saying, and he laid the good green coat across the corporal's shoulders over the gray, and he stepped back, and he stood at attention a moment in the dark, and then he turned and went down the hill after his friends. Crane let the coat lie where the boy had set it. He did not shrug it off. That was its own kind of mercy, and I marked it too. When the last of the lights had gone down the hill and it was only the 2 of us on the moor, the way it had been on 10,000 watches before, I came and stood beside him at the post, and for a long while neither of us spoke. The wind had dropped with the dark. The first stars were coming out over the tops, hard and clean. Somewhere far down the valley, a dog barked once and was quiet. "You didn't have to give them as much as you did," I said at last. "You could have stood mute the whole afternoon. It was your right." "I know." "Then why?" He was quiet a while. The fur of his cap stirred in the last of the wind. "Because the boy asked," he said, "not to crow. He asked because he wanted to be a better man than he'd been at noon, and a man who asks that of you honestly, you owe him an honest answer, or what was the shot for in the end? I didn't save a kingdom so its young men could grow up cruel. I saved it so they could grow up at all. If one of them grows up a little kinder for what happened on this hill today, then this was a better afternoon's work than the one on the river. That one only saved a life. This one might have mended one. I have turned that over many times in the years since, and I have never improved on it. We think the great deed is the shot, the single impossible thing done in the cold when everything hangs on it. And it is. But the great deed is also the 11 years afterward at a lonely post, asking nothing, taking the world's contempt without complaint, holding the load so that no one else need carry it, and then, when a foolish boy comes to you in the dark and asks to be made better, spending a little of your hard-kept silence to mend him. The shot is the thing the songs would remember if there were any songs, which there are not and which Crane would not allow. But the carrying is the thing I would have you remember. Any man with a gift might make the shot. Only a great one carries it the way Crane carried his. Old Lord Asher died that winter, up in the lodge's high rooms, and the county shoot stopped for a time, and the lords scattered back to their estates. But I heard things, in the way an old officer hears things. I heard that young Roderick of Fenwick had turned out, against everyone's expectation, into a fair and decent master of his lands, that he was the rare lord who knew his keepers' names and asked after their children, and that when a man who served him did a hard thing well, he had a habit of seeking that man out himself, in person, and standing before him, and thanking him plainly to his face. I heard he kept a green shooting coat hung in his hall that he would never wear and never explain, and that when men asked about it, he only said it had belonged to a fool he used to know, and that he kept it to remember the day he stopped being one. The colonel came back the next autumn, just the once, an old man on a stick, to stand a while at the fence post in the wind, He and Crane did not speak of the river. They spoke of the weather and the birds and the failing light the way old soldiers do. When he left, he saluted again, and again Crane returned it, and that was the last I ever saw of him. And Crane is at his post yet, as far as I know, or was when last I passed that way, a small still man at a fence post on a lonely moor, watching the hills, being taken by every stranger who passes for furniture, for a scarecrow, for a peasant who has surely never hit a thing worth hitting. He has never once corrected them. He never will. He told me why, the night of the shoot, in the last words he spoke before the cold drove us both to silence. And they are the truest words I know about the man, and about the trade, and about what honor really is when you strip away the medals nobody ever gave him. Let them think it, he said, looking out at the dark hills. A man who is taken for nothing is a man whose work is finished and whose country is safe. The day they finally need to know who I am will be the worst day of all our lives, so let them laugh. Let them call me what they like. I would rather be mocked at a fence post for the rest of my days than be thanked for what it would mean if they ever learned the truth. And he faced front and he watched the hills, and he kept the silence the keeper of a royal life, standing his post in the dark, asking nothing, owed everything and content at last to be called nothing at all.